Okay, so you like send a rogue ahead, yeah? And then they try to trick some mobs, and then you jump onto this like snap spot, and then all the mobs are supposed to port, but I swear it worked
Yeah.
differently back in BFA. I
Let
don't
me
get
tell
it.
you, it did. It worked very differently back in BFA. I've tried several different snaps and stuff in Atal'Dazar now, and I don't think there are very many viable ones left. I think that like snapping your tank down to Razan is maybe still good, but I don't even know what you can bring with it. So
I I think that okay, so basically what we're going to be talking about today is there are 6 dungeons available for testing this weekend. Both of the Dawn of the Infinites, Atal'Dazar, Waycrest Manor are available. Is what isn't available? It's Throne of the Tides
it's Turn of
and
the Tides and Everbloom. Yeah.
Everbloom. Okay. So Throne of the Tides and Everbloom are the only dungeons that aren't available. All the other dungeons are available for testing, including things such as like, Dark Art Thicket, Black or Cold, that kind of stuff. And so we're going to generally talk about what we've seen thus far through testing and kind of what maybe needs to change moving into 10.2 after having seen a little bit of testing. Of course, this is very, very early. I think that there's still a decent amount of time where we can give feedback to Blizzard about things that we think need to be changed. Starting off with Atal'Dazar and Waycrest Manor, though, I think that these are some of the stuff that we were the most surprised to see. Waycrest Manor has all the doors opened, like you and I discussed last week, hoping to see though.
Yeah, this is sweet. You could come in, you could go any direction you want. Bottom left, I think, which was the only door that didn't exist in BFA. That door was always closed. It was you either got top left, bottom right, or top right. Bottom left is a vibe, though. Bottom left is a nice way to go. You go left, grab like one pull, fight the first boss, fight Heartsbane Triad first. That is a fun path through the dungeon. But I think doing something like bottom right is still a good option as well, depending on how
I
you want to set up your lists.
I have a suspicion that bottom right's probably going to be a preferred path, at least in the sense of you're going to do first pull bottom right, and that involves mass pulling that hunting lodge area and potentially even back pulling that trash into the starting room. And then that like allows the trappers to get grouped up. It allows all those mobs to get grouped up. But on top of that, it allows you to really burn your lust with all of your offensive CDs. And I think that makes the most sense. I really like the idea of being able to pick your route through this dungeon too.
Yeah, I would love to see them put in like balancing to try and make the other, like if they look and they're like, oh, nobody's going top right, which because of course top right was demonic back in BFA, right? I would say that they would be really cool then if they added some more incentives to doing that.
I would say typically the issue with top right was twofold. It was that you got that bonus witch at the top and you were going over count, but on top of it too, you had to like walk up the stairs area and walk into Heartsbane Triad in a long way. Whereas now with all the doors open, it seems like you're able to like rush straight to Heartsbane Triad almost regardless of whether or not you go top right or not. You don't have to go the long way around. You can actually just like walk through that door.
Yeah,
Which is I don't know. It's nice. Atal snaps. What exactly do they do to the Atal snaps? So Squishy explained it to me. Maybe you can explain to the viewers like what they've exactly done.
Basically, they start evading before they snap, and then they snap, and then they start evading. They evade after they snap as well. But they are also like they'll snap mid ability cast and they'll keep casting them. It depends on the situation. Like if you're trying to set up what you're showing here of the onto the pillar stuff, a lot of those just seemed to very, very not work or be uncooperative. Like the other ones in the middle, you can maybe make it work, but it feels not worth. It feels not feasible to do. You can go in there with a tank only on a low key and like set them up and they do eventually work, but I think in any real world situation these are pretty dead.
I mean, with this big note that Squishy makes here, this is like really important. With all the following snaps, if there's anyone else in the party that is in combat and in range, the Sarids don't seem to snap. There's some issue with their ability targeting. On top of that, if they're meleeing that, like actively meleeing the tank, they also don't seem to snap. Which makes me think that Rogue might be mandatory for this dungeon. And any real competition level key, right, where you're actually going to be trying to do the dungeon because you're just going to snap all the mobs.
If you trick snap them, your rogue is in combat.
Well, the rogue, I think that it's going to snap them immediately, right?
No, that's not how it works anymore.
Really?
your rogue could tricks, and they could hit vanish afterwards.
Yeah.
But it's if anybody in the party's in combat and range, the swords aren't snapping. They're not
Interesting.
cooperating. Which I think so. I know that a lot of people liked snapping back in BFA. I think that it's kind of stupid that you would have to like that the polls were so correct to do that way of like jumping on this fiddly bit of terrain to make the mobs not do their mechanics, basically. But I think that if they want the snaps to not work, it would be really nice if they looked at the reason why we do snap those mobs, which, like the swords in particular, are still really nasty and hurt a lot.
Yes.
So I think lowering the damage on those sword jumps would be good. And then, with what they should do about the snapping in there, I kind of like that they're trying to break it. I don't know, like that was what Atal'Dazar was about the first time, but I think it was a kind of silly way for the dungeon to work, and it also gate kept a lot of Atal'Dazar was not a dungeon you could just go in and do and fight the mobs and kind of learn what, like you had to learn the snap strats, which
I agree.
I think is bad. I love what they did here, removing one of the honor guards from the pull before Volcall. It's actually so great for two different reasons. It's so much better to fight it now if you want to fight it, and it's also so much easier to skip it because you can just walk around on the sides now with one of the priests like sapped or caged or whatever, and you can just skip that too, which used to be really annoying to skip because there were two honor guards that weren't CCable on the sides.
I think overall they probably still need a decent amount more work to do with the Atal'Dazar. This one definitely feels like at its current pace, it feels like kind of what we were worried about whenever we made our last video, where it's just like a reprint of the BFA version with snapping removed. And again, I think that something that you said, this doesn't address why we were doing the snapping in the first place. I think that they need to really be looking at like mob adjustments with like how much damage you're taking from the toxic Sard leaps. That's something that is maybe a bit scary. I would. How would you feel if they use like the desync technology on the Sards? Because right now, Sards can leap at the exact same time and do very frequently leap the last like the exact same millisecond. Do you think that maybe desyncing them a little bit would be better? Because that's something that we've seen them use a lot lately.
I think that would be a good thing to think about. Yeah, just making them desync. I think giving them something like instead of an instant leap cleave thing, something where they like look in a direction, do a 1 second cast, and then jump where the person was with the swirly or something. Like those, I think that sort of way for the mechanic to work instead of just being instant AoE damage would be good.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the other dungeons. So we have like Darkheart Thicket, we have both of the Dawn of the Infant dungeons, we have Blackrock Hold as well, all to kind of cover. I think so what do you want to hit first? You want to hit Dawn of the Infant, or you want to hit the Legion dungeons first?
Darkheart's fine, yeah. We were looking at that. That's This dungeon, for me, it felt pretty reasonable, except the like Dryads and Bats felt way overtuned. Everything else in here seemed kind of fine.
I will say that the tuning on this place is a giga miss. Even still, there were dungeons that were not able to be timed at even like a 20 without accruing 55 plus deaths, and then this dungeon was one shot with a full wipe. I saw it as high as a 26. There might be people who are doing this dungeon on a 30.
So
right, like
my experience was that most dungeons felt about equal key level to each other, except for Dawn of the Infinite, which felt 5 levels harder than everything else.
Yes.
Darkheart felt, I mean, the Bats and the Dryads in here did feel way overtuned. The other stuff felt about the same as like Blackrook and Atal'Dazar mobs.
I will say though that like it seemed like Blackrook and Atal'Dazar, at least in some capacity, were at least there was like more deaths that were going to be involved in those. Particularly Atal'Dazar. Blackrook Hold was also, like you were saying though, maybe relatively the same difficulty. I think that there is a problem already with key level that we're seeing though. I think that we're already too high on the key level, and that Blizzard maybe needs to be looking at just how high of a level people are doing. Now this is PTR testing. People are scaled up to 954 for this testing, right? Is that the right number?
It depended on, you could proc different numbers. Yeah, when you went in, like you'd go. Sometimes you were 440, sometimes you were 454.
Or no, not. Why did I say 9?
That was Legion numbers.
450, 454.
Yeah.
You're like 454, allegedly.
It depends. Like it was changing on different dungeons for me, at least.
I think you're supposed to be about that number. But I think if you're able to do, if you're already doing, or we're seeing these, dungeons be done north of 25 pretty easily, even if it is by like top level groups, I think that's pretty likely an issue. I don't know how they're supposed to address this though.
So I would say that looking at the scaling in terms of like how hard is this number compared to the gear that we have, and I would say this also for raid testing, I think these are less useful ways to look at scaling because like those are easy for them to change. I've heard that there's like a K value number that's still not correct in there.
Okay.
And
Now,
I think that when you're looking at keys, it's like relative to the other keys, are they doing okay? Which I think the answer is not. It's not there yet. Like Dawn of the Infinite is too hard, and maybe Dark Heart's too easy. And then within any given dungeon, are the mobs relative to each other a similar difficulty, right? Because if the answer to that is no, then we also have a problem.
Yeah.
But just the answer of like how hard are 23 scaled on PTR is I don't think that's an important thing to look at.
dude, Galakrond's Fall is insane, by the way. I don't know if people have actually, like, viewers of ours, I don't know if they've necessarily tested this dungeon, but this dungeon is quite a bit harder than the other keys, I will say. How long did it take you guys to do this dungeon, and like what were you guys doing it on?
We did this on 20 fortified tyrannical.
That's what we did it on as well, and it was
because we didn't have access to a higher key for it. I think we timed.
You timed it.
It was either timed or very close to fleet. It was one of the two.
I will say that every single Galakron that I've seen, including my own personal experience, looked very similar to the one that we're showing right here, where it is a 90 death absolute fiesta.
Let me go take a look. I know we almost timed something and we depleted something.
Every single time it's like a lot of deaths to a lot of the bosses.
Okay, yeah, we timed it with 10 seconds to spare.
And how many do you have deaths on it?
Yeah, we had 39 deaths.
Yep, okay. Okay, I feel, I don't know, Galakrons in particular, it feels like it's a lot harder than the other dungeons. I don't know what they necessarily need to do about this. I do think that there is some level of issue where, like, I think a couple of the other dungeons are a little bit too easy still. I think that Dark Heart is still a bit, outside of the bats and the dryads, like you were saying, you're not really going to die to anything else. Yeah?
Yeah, I think for me, the big problem with these Dawn of the Infinite dungeons, like, tuning aside, there's just so much RP in them. You're standing and waiting for Chromie to open a door like 12 different times across the two dungeons.
Yeah.
And you're just sitting there, you're waiting for like Atal'Dazar to tell you her life story in Proto-Dragon form in both of them. You're just like, I thought the dungeon was really cool. I loved the lore of this place. I thought it was really fun and flavorful, and I loved doing it on M0. But I really hope they come in and they do what they did with Uldaman, where they took those moments. You're waiting for Chromie to break down a door and just like, just remove those, right? Like, even the ones that are 5 seconds feel so, it's so like, it feels bad. You're just sitting there waiting.
I will say, how do you feel about boss rush? Before I give my opinion, how do you feel about boss rush dungeons in general? Because there's the trash density in these dungeons is quite low, and I feel like in general it's more like pretty boss heavy.
Yeah, I think it works pretty well in Dawn of the Infinite. Like, I think the trash pulls, difficulty aside, obviously there's a bunch of demonic trash pulls that you just need all your cooldowns for, and even then they're just nuclear difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
But that aside, I think that the ratio is good. Like, you're not just fighting. You're basically never fighting filler trash, right? Like, every trash pull is like, oh, this is this trash pull that does this unique thing. It's not like here is the third pull of warriors and mages or whatever. I like that. I
actually agree. I saw some people complaining about the trash density in these dungeons in general being too low, and like it was also in conjunction with the RP amount being too high, which I think that those are almost two separate issues. I do think that the amount of RP that is present in this dungeon is a bit high. Maybe needs to be looked at just a little bit. Kind of something similar to like what we saw from. You remember? I think that they've done a good job in like Streets of Wonder and in Halls of Valor about adjusting the amount of RP that's just present in the dungeon in general. Hopefully they take that technology and implement it here, where like in Streets, what they did was they made RP on a couple of the bosses start immediately whenever you like entered the area, as opposed to you having to wait for like voice lines and whatnot. And so maybe they can do something like that where, having Chromie instantly summon the portal, or the portal already be active or something like that. I think could
Yeah,
go a
just
long
like
way.
any spot where you'd have to wait for her to open the door. I just wish she would do it instantly, and you would never
Mhm.
be running against a wall waiting for that to happen.
Okay. The only other stuff that we have is in relation to affixes, which I think that we've covered affixes very specifically a couple of different times, but I think we have an update in regards to what's going to be going down with affixes in season 3. There was a interview with MMORPG where there was assistant lead encounter designer Taylor Sanders was talking about affixes in general and stated that there's no plans to update Mythic Plus affixes for season 3, but devs will be looking at PTR testing the new dungeon rotation to gather more information, probably in relation to the dungeon, but also in relation to the affixes themselves. I think typically data on affixes during PTR testing is, I'm skeptical.
I mean, I've
at best.
played.
People don't.
I threw
test.
affixes on the keys. We had some keys that were higher than 20, so we'd put real affixes on them, and then like 20 would just through tyrannical fortified.
Yeah.
To kind of simulate the key going up a little bit. I think that it's kind of reasonable to not expect affixes to change a whole lot in season 3, because they did do a reasonably large shakeup in season 2, right? 3 affixes came out, 3 affixes came in. There was reworking happening to explosive, and then it got shelved, and volcanic just got brought back in, and the seasonal got removed as well. So I think it's reasonable to be able to not expect that level of shakeup every time. I do wish they would, take a look at a couple of problem affixes, because I do not really like logging into play on a couple of the affixes that are available, and I think that the overall play rate on those weeks is probably a lot lower as well.
There's a pretty good write-up in regards to state of affixes on Wowhead that Squishy made, kind of talking through all of the affixes and kind of like what the general, community thoughts and just his personal thoughts on the affixes were, like which ones needed to be changed and whatnot. And I'm kind of surprised that they're actually taking the stance where there are no changes for season 3. I know that you state that like you shouldn't be necessarily expecting that, but I think that with what Ian was stating here in this most recent post, Ian basically said that he thought Incorporeal was in a healthy spot, but Afflicted needed some further iteration in the season. I thought that both Afflicted, personally, I thought that both Afflicted and Incorporeal needed maybe some further iteration with just kind of how they ended up working out. Kind of basically what Squishy was stating here, where like the affixes hasn't worked out as intended. He personally thinks it's harmful to community perception of classes that don't have a dispel and don't feel useful this week. This is in regards to Afflicted. It'd be a different story if a class without Dispel brought a bunch of other utility, and for 1 week they were less important to keys. However, classes that don't have a Dispel, Hunter or Warrior, also tend to be the ones that don't have a lot of other utility than keys, so this affix is just doubling down and excluding classes that already weren't incentivized to be brought. And I think that that's actually pretty important. I will say, though, for pure DPS in general, non-hybrids, DPS is normally king. So at least they have
Yeah,
access.
I mean, you'll bring hunters if they're doing massive damage, right? Like you will do that, but obviously it gets harder in the group finder if you're not a meta spec and you don't have an answer to Incorporeal and it's Incorporeal week. Like that does get nastier.
I think that that's a big issue, right? Where there's there's nothing saving you if it's also,
For me, Sanguine as well. I feel like Sanguine with the return of Waycrest, with the return of Black Recold, these are not friendly dungeons with the Sanguine affix. These are particularly Atal'Dazar as well. Yeah, these dungeons are particularly harsh with that affix, and I think this would be a very good time for them to look at Sanguine and be like, is this really fun? Right? Like, are people enjoying this, or is this causing people to log out?
Somebody asked me the other day. I don't remember exactly who it was. Somebody goes, "Should Sanguine actually stack? Like, is there any reason to have 2 stacks of the Sanguine Puddle on the mob? Like, is it really, like, engaging?"
I think stacking is kind of, like, I think stacking is a fine part of the mechanic. I just wish it was capped on how much healing it could do to, like, I just wish each pool could heal for, like, 5 or 10 mil or something, and then it would despawn, or
I feel like
something like that.
I think to me, it's like, I think they were kind of right? Does it really actually ever really need to go over 5% per 2 seconds or whatever the Sanguine heal tick rate is? Probably not. Like, if you're healing mobs anyways with Sanguine, that is already a punishment.
Yeah, I mean, the way that it scales up into higher keys as well, the fact that it is that percent healing is very very harsh.
Yeah.
And it means that like if it lands on the kinds of mobs that have higher percent healths are also the mobs that are less likely to be CCable and are more likely to just start casting. And so whenever an unCCable mob is just channeling something in a Sanguine, it is the worst feeling in the game.
I mean, Squishy also makes a really good point here. How many unknockable mobs do you have? Should you knock before or after the mobs die? Are these mobs going to cast or channel anytime soon? And I think that it requires a level of, I don't want to say coordination, but like awareness on.
Yeah, like mastery. But it's the kind of mastery of the dungeon that it doesn't feel especially satisfying because the way you manipulate these mobs is so much based on like making a good guess about whether the
Yeah.
mob is actually going to die in 2 seconds or three, which is not like that's not actually something that's super fun to optimize. I don't think.
I think that this is probably this conversation that you and I are having, this back and forth that you and I are having right now, is exactly why I kind of take issue to them being like, yeah, we're not actually updating Mythic Plus affixes for season 3. I don't necessarily need like a full overhaul, but I do think that there were some particular things that they should have addressed going into season 3, and I think Afflicted and Incorporeal were at least my bare minimum for things that likely needed to be addressed. Maybe also you could say Raging probably should have been in that category as well. I don't know. It feels really weird with these affixes, especially like pugging. I think that Incorporeal and Afflicted are still far too difficult for pugs.
Yeah, I do not like the way that the difficulty of those affixes falls so disproportionately onto certain specs and certain players within groups. I think it creates this really strange situation where, like, for some people the affix is absolutely nothing, and then for some people it's like, this is, my entire key is about doing this because I'm the only person who can. And then for some people it's like, well, I just can't play this week because I can't handle this affix, right? Like I can't get into keys. All of those I think are not where an affix should be.
I mean, I think that everybody's experience is so varied. Affixes in general are such a weird discussion to have because everybody's experience is relative to like the people that they're playing with or like the key level that they're doing. I saw a post, I think it was on Reddit recently, that was like really taking aim at bursting, and I got sent in there like, what do you think? And I'm like, I see people here who don't know how to deal with bursting because they were complaining about getting like 5 and 6 stacks and stuff like that. In reality, and then some people were also saying that like high-end groups actually coordinate killing off mobs close together for bursting, but in reality, I don't know about you, but my groups don't do that. We have our healer heal us.
Well, every high-end group does have access to Master Spell as well, which is very... Master Spell handles like so much of the most dangerous situations.
We would jam a 20 stack at the first pull of Ruby Life Pools last season whenever you weren't playing with like a priest healer, and you would say, heal me.
I do think that that's like that is also something where when you're playing with like a Giga healer, right? Like a healer that can handle big pulls also can handle the big bursting.
Yeah.
And then whenever you have like big bursting on a not big pull because there's just a bunch of swords or whatever, that is something that, the sorts of for the same reason that like Court of Stars healing checks needed to get nerfed, right? Is like not everybody's playing with just insane healers, and when your healer can't handle stuff, it is a very unfun experience for all 5 players.
That's why I'm saying like I think affix difficulty also is a matter of perspective of like where you're coming from with the player base, like who are you playing with, that kind of thing. It's not necessarily about something I saw that was pretty common in that post was like, oh, coordinated groups don't have these issues. I don't think it's about being coordinated. I don't think it's about being in voice with, or having rapport with the people that you play with. I think it's about like
having a healer that you can say heal me and they'll actually heal you.
Yeah, exactly.
That is something. I mean, you can see, and this is a side note, but you can see this in like discussion around the are healers too powerful or are they too weak thing, because there's just a lot of people who are talking past each other there because they're just, if you're very good or not as good at healing, it's a very different experience, right?
Healing is something that is like, once you reach the minimum threshold for the healing required, it seems like it becomes like a decent amount easier for the player base to be successful. But getting to that point, especially in some very specific circumstances, such as the healing checks and core stars that you're talking about, can be quite hard. I don't know. Yeah. I think that overall, though, I tend to have agreed with a lot of the points that Squishy made in this post, where I think in general affixes are still probably on the too impactful end. Bolstering still feels bad, like I don't know. I think it sucks to kind of call for affix nerfs every single season. I think that they're, I don't know, Is this an 11.0 thing that they need to be looking at? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I do think 10.2 was or 10.1 was a large affix overhaul patch. I think it's likely that the best we're going to get, especially given what they've just said, is a small affix patch. But I do think there's some small tweaks that could make, especially like Sanguine, a lot better.
I think okay, so yeah, making Sanguine a little bit better. I think that I think there could be some QOL changes to Raging as well, making it get knocked off after like 1 CC is used into them.
Yeah, I've always liked that proposal for that affix.
Yeah. Afflicted, I feel like they've heavily missed the mark on Afflicted. Afflicted is supposed to be, I think, a healer affix. And I think it was supposed to replace Grievous, but now it's a hybrid check. I think that that
is a strange part about, like, I mean, your healer sort of can do it, but any group that's having the healer do it is not going to be able to push very high keys, right? Like if you're trying to do like title keys in a group that was handling Afflicted by their healer doing it, like I don't know, miss me with that.
Dude, okay, we were joking about the healer heal thing. Absolutely nobody is being like, yeah, you should heal these Afflicted mobs. And
right.
On top of that too, it's like Dispel mechanics.
Well, because there's just so
Mythic...
many pulls where that would be impossible.
Dispel mechanics and Mythic Plus are always so plentiful as well. Like even magic dispels, and so they have to jam their magic dispel in some mechanic, and then you have to, on top of that, you want 2 other hybrids that are almost purely dedicated at being able to spell the Afflicted in conjunction with your healer. I don't know. Weird affix. I think that if there's one that I would like to see change is maybe something with Afflicted. All right. Any final thoughts on the Dungeons or affix discussion?
Let us know in the comments what you think.
Yeah, the testing is available up until like Monday after this video goes live. If you have time, hop on the PTR, go test the dungeons for yourself. I think now is a great time to really try to build your skills.
I think it'll be on probably most weekends. Usually they do, unless they have something big they're fixing. So, yeah. Cool.
All right, GG's. I hope to see you guys later. Goodbye.